So if we look at the first verse that Dan attempts to use, Exodus 20, verse 5, we read, "You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing children for the iniquity of parents to the third and fourth generation of those who reject me." Now, I want you to notice two things here. The first is that Dan casually tries to gloss over the last part of the verse, which says, "of those who reject me." But the second thing I want you to notice is that there's no period here at the end of the verse. This tells us that this is the middle of a thought, the middle of a sentence, but Dan decides that he needs the sentence to end here, because if he continues the thought into verse 6 and finishes the sentence, then it completely erodes the foundation of his claim. And this is why he intentionally tries to hide verse 6 from his audience. So first, we're going to deal with verse 5. If we look at the Hebrew and Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament, otherwise known as Halot, which is generally seen by most modern-day scholars as the most accurate representation of the Hebrew language that we have today, we find that the word here being translated as punished is the original Hebrew word pakad. And according to Halot, it doesn't mean punished. It means to attend to intervene, or to call to account. So according to the most modern-day source that we have for the original Hebrew language, Exodus 20 verse 5 means that God is holding generations accountable for their own sin, not arbitrarily punishing innocent children. If you notice the qualifier at the end of the verse that Dan tries to gloss over, it says, "of those who reject me." And again, Halot would say that that word that is translated as reject would be better translated as hate. So God isn't saying that he punishes children for their parents' sins. What he's saying is that when a family line continues in the same rebellion, the consequences naturally extend to later generations because they continue to hate God. However, verse 6 shows us that if they choose to repent and if they break the cycle of hate towards God, that he forgives to the 1,000th generation. This is why Dan needs the sentence to stop at verse 5, because by stopping at verse 5 and glossing over the end of it, he gives his audience the impression that God actually punishes children for the sins of their father. And again, we didn't have to do any harmonizing at all. All we had to do was actually read the text and let it speak for itself. Dan is the one trying to change the interpretation of the verse to fit his dogma. He's ignoring the data and he's ignoring the evidence. And he's just spewing what his audience wants to hear so that he feels accepted by them and they see that he is a part of their group. So read in context, Ezekiel 18:20 has no contradiction to Exodus 20 verse 5. Both verses make it abundantly clear that God punishes individuals for their individual sin. However, Exodus 20 verse 5 does give us a view into the generational curse that can follow into future generations. Not because a physical curse gets translated down into those generations, but because children see the way that their father acts and they emulate those actions. We know that even today through modern science. Children observe their parents and they copy their parents' behavior. So if a father lives in contempt and disregard for the law of God, then those children are more than likely going to continue to emulate that throughout the generations of their lives. And God's going to continue to visit that sin generation after generation to those who hate him. However, to those who decide to love him and to break the cycle, he offers grace, mercy, and forgiveness. So if we look at a modern day example to kind of drive home the emphasis and the point in Exodus chapter 20, verse 5 and 6, imagine a father who's deep in organized crime. His choices don't just affect him, they shape his kids' lives too. Growing up, they see their father breaking the law, taking risks, standing above consequences, and over time, some of them even start doing the same thing. They think it's normal or even expected of them. And when they eventually stand before a judge, the judge already knows the family's history and he knows their name. The father's sin has followed his children into court, influencing how the law treats them. That's exactly what Exodus 25 is talking about. Sin has consequences that ripple through generations. It's not isolated to a specific individual. But just like in life, there's hope. Verse 6 tells us that God's blessings can also flow to those who love him, breaking the entire cycle of sin for future generations.
But let's go on.
Whoa, before we go any further, we got to check our scoreboard. We got dogma standing at 0, data at 1. Now let's see if Dan can get the scoreboard evened up in the next round.